Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this closing plenary session of working for the common good at the bargaining table and beyond. We've had an awesome time in this mini conference, starting off with these groundbreaking national victories, getting incredibly personal in small group breakout sessions, listening to each other and local examples of both tactics, as well as topics, as well as partners in the community for you to build power with to win victories for the common good, whether it is at the bargaining table, at the legislature, in the judicial system, or another venue. Again, like I said at the close of our opening plenary, we have great examples, both these really personal local examples and national beacons and examples of wherever a union and a community have power and they have a common good idea, they always have the potential for a victory for your communities and for your neighbors. For this closing plenary session, I am really, really privileged to welcome four union leaders, two union leaders, experienced union leaders in the private sector, two really experienced union leaders in the public sector, who are also going to share some of their personal examples of what it took to get started bargaining for the common good and working for the common good, pushing those boundaries and what they see for our common good work moving forward. So before we begin with questions, let me introduce these great union leaders. We have Larry Cohen, who is President Emeritus of the Communication Workers of America. He's the founding chair of Jobs with Justice and the Democracy Initiative, and he is the current chair of the board of Our Revolution. Welcome, Larry. And we have Frederick Ingram. He is the Secretary Treasurer of the American Federation of Teachers. Before that, he was president of the Florida Education Association and United Teachers of Dade, and a past finalist for Florida's Teacher of the Year. And we have Javier Murillo. He's a fellow at the Center for Innovation in Worker Organization at the Rutgers School of Management and Labor Relations. He's also the past president of SEIU Local 26 and founder of the popular bipartisan podcast, Wrong About Everything. He's been a Fulbright Scholar and is an award-winning artist and storyteller and was a superdelegate at the 2016 Democratic National Convention. Jessica Tang is president of the Boston Teachers Union. She is co-founder of the teacher activist group Boston, the Boston Educational Justice Alliance, and the Massachusetts Education Justice Alliance. She serves on the board of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance and the Parent Teacher Home Visit Project. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you here this afternoon. I'm going to start by just, again, recapping. Today, we've heard some really motivating national stories, and then we participated in these breakout sessions where all of us made things really personal and committed an action to each other. I've had the privilege of knowing each of you, and I know much of your stories, but for our participants, I'd like for you to share your common good origin stories. What was it that caused you to realize your union could or should use your power for greater good beyond the already traditional important work of wages, benefits, and working conditions? Larry, why don't I start with you, and then I'll go to Fed, Javier, and Jessica.
Sure, thanks, Mary Catherine. Let me make sure I'm not on mute. Yep. Thanks, Mary Catherine, and great working with you on this conference. I think it's been spectacular. And hopefully it's inspiring, everybody to carry this on in their own way and in their own place. So for me, as a young worker, literally almost 50 years ago, coming from the public sector initially, but then predominantly working in the private sector in the union itself, it struck me that even then, with union bargaining coverage in the US being lower than anywhere else in the world, any other democracy in the world, and now it's even lower, that if we didn't in some way act as if we were bargaining for all, not just bargaining for ourselves at the bargaining table, it wouldn't be likely that we would achieve our goals. And so again, that started for me back in New Jersey in the 1980s, but 1987, as you mentioned, we started Jobs with Justice. It was very clear. The whole premise of that was that we sign a pledge card wherever we live, that I'll be there 5 times a year for somebody else's fight as well as my own. But a lot of that was really framed around making those bargaining fights and organizing fights for the common good and framing them that way. And that can be true of almost, any union organizing drive and any bargaining that any of us are doing. But for me, it really started there in the public sector, where if we didn't translate what we were doing back in New Jersey into a broader why this is good for the public, we obviously weren't going to succeed, even though we were at that time almost 40,000 state workers who had just organized and won a representation election. But that broader framework is really what carried us through, including getting a progressive income tax for the first time in New Jersey to help fund public services.
Thanks, Larry. Fed, how about you? What is your common good origin story?
So I think my common good origin story is probably two-pronged. I came in as a very young leader, but with the benefit of having Randy at UFT at the time, and seeing what she was doing with community and is the new density, and talking about and defining her union as a part of the community, as part of family, as part of the children's well-being. And then I had the benefit of watching Karen Lewis do something magical in Chicago, where the community actually became the bargaining team. There was something in that I saw that we could replicate down in Miami. And so I had the opportunity to kind of study that. And then there was this other young leader, Mary Catherine Ricker, over in St. Paul, and she did the school St. Paul deserves. And I said, something about this has a through line that we're talking about, not only the negotiation table, but we're talking about the kitchen table. We're talking about those things that parents and grandparents and nieces and nephews and uncles and aunts and pastors and healthcare workers all want, because at the nexus of our public schools is everything. It's the one thing that we all care about, our children. And so when I saw those things coming together, I linked that to what I knew was already good, meaning that I saw children who couldn't have access to band instruments. I saw kids who did not have access to glasses, and they couldn't, operate in the framework that they needed to. And I saw teachers who didn't have what they needed. And then I saw what was going on in the community with housing and with healthcare. And I knew all of those things we talked about at the bargaining table, just other people didn't know. And so when I said we could link those things in, I had the opportunity to have great mentors and great tutors, and I learned along the way, but we also put it into the framework of contracts that I led down in Miami. The one that comes to mind is Walk a Mile in Our Shoes. And so that was what we linked everything to for a long time. And so all of those things helped me to understand, to get rid of my fear for bargaining for the common good, because there is a fear in some instances to bring people into your framework of what you do. And so I knew we were going to be on the right side of history, and I believe in bargaining for the common good. So that's very quickly how I kind of developed this touch for bargaining for the common good.
Thank you so much. Javier, how about you? What is your origin story to common good work?
Thanks, Mary Catherine, and fellow panelists. And so I was president of Local 26 for 14 years, and it's a union of janitors, security officers, other service workers, and it's hard for me to pinpoint, when a common good bargaining strategy origin, because the work of our union, because our union is overwhelmingly immigrants, people of color, in a state that is overwhelmingly right now white and not immigrant, and the issues that we were dealing with at the bargaining table, for example, having to do with immigration documentation, et cetera, were not simply issues that people experienced at the workplace, but that their communities experienced, that they experienced at home and at church. And so it was simply a natural way of just working to engage with church leaders, right? Where our members went to church, and the relationship, so on immigration needing to be integrated into the immigrant rights movement was simply just a fact of life. I think that we then took that into bargaining spaces to make the case, and janitors, we following the Justice for Janitors model, because we're subcontracted industries, we are sitting across the table from subcontractors who do not have a lot of power. The power they comes from the checks of the building owners who hire them. And so we are not sitting across the table from the truly powerful. And so we must have public campaigns. And a public campaign for any union, I think, only makes sense when we put our issues in the context of what it does for the greater good. I think that, this is not just smart, I think, message-wise, because one of the knocks on unions historically has been, well, unions look out for their own members, but don't care about the rest of us. But also just because it is simply a truth that when we're talking about low-wage workforces, especially, that when we win raises, unlike, when Republicans give tax cuts to the rich, that money is not reinvested in communities. When working poor people win a raise, they are able to afford things and spend it in their actual in their communities. And so that was a case that we always made, that this was that our contracts had a significance beyond the community, beyond our own members. And then starting in 2009 was the first time that the union took on the issue, say, of global climate change. The industry, the cleaning industry, overwhelmingly in the United States, like, people clean at night, and so lights are on at night. And so very often when there are shifts to day shift cleaning, that is done from the perspective of trying to save labor costs. So we decided we would be proactive and say, we are all for day shift cleaning. We just believe that workers need to be at the table from the very beginning. And what we were able to do then was to transition buildings from night shift cleaning to day shift cleaning. And there's still a lot of work to be done there, but to do it with advance warning and planning so that it's a win-win for all involved. And there's a public building in downtown Minneapolis that ended up saving yearly in energy cost savings over almost $100,000 a year, and we did not lose a single member to any staff reductions, and members had working hours that they preferred. So that later was, since stepping down from the union in 2019, the union has been in contract negotiations for janitors again, and it was the first climate strike by janitors in the country, and I think first climate worker strike on climate change, that ended up winning a training fund to create career ladders for janitors to go from being janitors to being energy auditors in buildings. That's the long-term vision for it. So bargaining for the common good, and we've been doing it since longer than we've been calling it that, is just something that comes second nature to us. And I'm just really thrilled at how much we are talking about it now in the labor movement. I was just earlier was not able to be part of breakout sessions because I was being interviewed by Minnesota Public Radio for about the police union contract in Minneapolis, and from that perspective, I think that's something, when we look at the issue of law enforcement and the big debates we're having in this country right now, the missing component at the bargaining table between cities and their police forces is the community. And I firmly believe that we will not make progress until on those issues of policing until we change that. And that's just one of the many ways that I think, to me, that I think of bargaining for common good as a worldview. It's not simply about the moment when we are in negotiations. It's about how we do our work on a day-to-day basis and how we view our contracts and our and the labor movement vis-a-vis community in general.
Thanks so much, Javier. Jessica, how about you? What is your common good origin story of your union leadership?
So I actually have a similar story to Mr. Ingram, in that back in 2013, I came out of the classroom. I'm a middle school social studies teacher, and I became the organizing director at the BTU. And at that time, there was a lot, I mean, there still is a lot of teacher blaming and, negative stereotypes, and just like this idea that, oh, unions are just against everything. And so I said, we really want to have a strategy. Well, first of all, it's not true, but I don't think we always do the best job as unions of saying what we're for. And so the contract negotiations actually then become a really great opportunity for us to share with the community what we're fighting for and what we've won, and the things that a lot of people take for granted, including many of our own members. And so I was looking around and figuring out, like, how do we do a better job of telling what we're for? I'm so sorry. He was like sleeping and peaceful. And of course, at the moment when I need to speak is when he decides he wants to be cranky.
He's telling you what he's for. Absolutely. We're here for it.
And so I started looking around, and I too was inspired by a local leader in St. Paul, and also in Chicago as well, both with the strike in 2012 in Chicago, and then also learning about the community coalition process and creating the Schools Our Students Deserve campaign that you led in St. Paul. And so we always try to learn from our other locals, and we certainly did. And in fact, now our campaign is creating the schools our students deserve. And I know many other locals have adapted that as well. And that in and of itself, creating the schools our students deserve, I think is a reflection of this idea of the common good. It's not just about teachers, it's about the community. It's about what our students and community and families deserve. And so that is how we started putting in a lot of common good demands. And again, I think a lot of folks are already doing the work and they may not even realize it. So, throughout the pandemic in particular, so when you're advocating for better facilities and HVAC and, look, we're negotiating for more school nurses, and that was a huge win for us, a school nurse in every school building, and it happened right before the pandemic. How timely was that? But before that, we started small. So we advocated for some funding for parent-teacher home visits. We advocated for a restorative justice coordinator, and then it became 3. And then we advocated for a citywide hub schools coordinator, and now we have 14. And so sometimes you start small, but it can grow. And so those are some examples of how we got involved in this work, and some of the things that we have also won in the meantime too.
Thank you so much for that, Jessica. And actually, all of you, thank you. I think all of you had these connections. Fed, I think you talked about this being this through line in these stories, and all of you had the same through line. And Javier talking about how this is the work we do, that this is, Larry, you talked about just this being natural. And Jessica, this is just what we are for, and wanting to be what we are, wanting to name what we are for. And all of you have examples of truly trusting your instincts, trusting the voices, or trusting your gut. And what excites me about that is, again, we came out of these breakout sessions where people were making their own individual commitments. We know what it's like in a room of union activists, union family, to make a commitment to each other publicly. A lot of you shared examples of commitments that turned into full-fledged campaigns, and public campaigns at that. And so I'd like you to give everyone a window into how their commitment will be joining yours in this larger common good work. And some of you shared some of your first steps into this work. What were some of the first steps you asked your members to do, so that it wasn't just a singular leader leading this effort, that it was truly it was truly a union-wide effort? What were some of those first steps you asked members to do so it really was an all hands on deck feeling? Why don't let's go to Jessica. Do you mind if I'll go to you first, and then Javier, and then Frederick and Larry?
You're on mute, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks. So what I'm saying is that we did several things. One of them being actually really being intentional about engaging not just our members in helping us to form our contract proposals and informing our campaigns, but also beginning to create, and this was many years ago, and I want to reiterate what I said in the small group, which is that sometimes it just starts with 3 or 4 people, just 2 committed parents. Maybe we started with a student group too, and to share, what are our common interests. And then actually we started doing forums. So when we were putting together a contract proposal, not only did we survey our members, but we also had community forums and surveyed our families and community stakeholders and students to say, well, what do you think we should be fighting for? And some of those things belong in a contract negotiation, but sometimes they continue as a coalition advocacy campaign efforts outside of our contract campaign too. And so I think, you can start small, and then as you continue to build trust and build the work and build an authentic relationship, then your coalition will grow. And you start with a few small wins, and then that, I think, creates momentum to keep going and keep fighting for the bigger common good items too. And while you're doing that, you're communicating and collaborating and building that mutual trust that's really necessary for common good work.
Thanks so much. Fed, how about you? How did you get United Teachers of Dade to be on board alongside you and not just make it a singular union leader effort?
Yeah, so I think as a leader, you have to understand that bargaining for the common good is not new, right? This is not a new concept to us. I mean, I'm a student of history, right? You can go back to the late 1800s, I guess, right? To talk about, how unions kind of developed, crafted this, notion of, utilizing and attaching itself to various community. But I'll just give you 1 or 2 examples. We in Miami had a real problem with losing our African-American boys who were dropping out of school at a high rate. And it was alarming to us as a union. And so what we did was we wanted to have a longer school day, but we didn't want to have it isolated and the district took it over where it didn't mean anything, where we wanted to have it as a resource where these students would have engagement, maybe have a mentor, maybe have a counselor, maybe do some other learning, reading or some concepts that we partnered with the NFL or whomever. And so what we needed to do was get the parents on board, and we needed to also get students on board, and we needed to get our stakeholders on board. So what I did was convince my building reps to go out every Saturday to Pop Warner football games, because we knew that our young men were going to be out there, and we knew that we could get some dads out there too. And so we go out and handbill and flyer and talk to people and have conversations. We took those conversations from the little Pop Warner football field to the barbershops. And on Saturdays, we go to 10 barbershops and we offer free haircuts to the students if they would bring a parent and have a 5-minute conversation with us. And then we snowballed that onto Sunday because we knew we could catch mom in church. And so we did this kind of wave of, African-American churches, and we were going to, get these folks on board with us. And we really built the community support and forced the district's hand to give us more counselors, forced the district's hands to actually start to deal with this issue. And we got our members paid to do it, because what our district wanted to do, they wanted to recognize the issue, but they just wanted to hoist on responsibility without, the compensation, without the, the union protections, that kind of thing. And so we built a campaign around something that meant something to the community and actually got them on board. That was recognizing social justice, economic justice, equity, and really building from the inside out our schools. So it got our members involved. It got our stakeholders involved. Of course, the politicians were excited because they saw teachers, and people trust teachers in our schools. And so that's just one example of one issue that we were able to get, a common good kind of issue, to our district, passed in our contract, and it actually helped not only our members, but it helped the communities around us. And so I have a million examples, but I just thought I'd give you that one because to me, that's a heartfelt one because it means something to me personally, that we were able to go out in our community and save lives, because that's ultimately what we did. Bargaining for the common good has a direct correlation with the way people live their lives. And so I think, if you couch it in that way, then I think your members and community will come on board with that.
Thanks so much, Fed. Javier, how about you? How did you involve members and make sure it was a union-wide campaign as opposed to that traditional narrative of members just assuming the union leader will do it all by themselves?
Yeah, so I want to speak a little to moments that were not about bargaining, because I think one of the things that about bargaining for the common good is I think sometimes we in the union movement think about the first word to put the emphasis on the first word as opposed to just the concept itself of being something that we do all the time. And I'll give to your question, the example I'll give, right, is that I think it's not at all unusual historically for unions to ask for and receive community support. I think the difference, and there are jokes that clergy here is to make about, you rent a caller, right? That you call up a few clergy who could always count on to come to your strike line and give it some semblance of community support. The difference is a deep engagement that really puts, at the moment of bargaining, community issues at the bargaining table. But more significantly, I would say that means the union is always engaged in all of its work with the community. So for example, one of the things that I noted, as we worked with a lot of community groups, right, is that that we were not bringing our skills to the table in a way that we were asking them to bring their skills. At negotiations time, we asked community to bring their skills for turnout, et cetera, to help with both our issues and community issues. But one thing that a lot of community groups are not familiar with is the strategy behind bargaining, about how to create a crisis for people who won't sit down with you, so that they have to sit down with you. So one thing we did here in a couple different instances was form community bargaining tables. That in one instance we sat down with Target Corporation when the city of Minneapolis was considering a fair scheduling ordinance, and we had a community bargaining table. We called it that. We had it, and I led that table with other members of Local 26 and community groups. And what we did was literally teach like what it means to bargain. I remember the first time we got a counter from Target, our community partners, everyone was saying, "Oh, screw this! They're not serious. We should just leave." And I just said, "Hey guys, the first employer counter always sucks." That's like we got one, so let's. And we actually ended up getting a deal with Target. Ironically, one of the most powerful corporations in Minnesota, but ironically, we got a deal with Target, and we didn't get a deal with the Minneapolis City Council, run by Democrats at the time. We also did that with regards to U.S. Bank, and we set up rules for engagement when it came to community bargaining. So one of those rules being, for example, that if you can get a win out of U.S. Bank, you should take that. What you're committing to is to be in solidarity with everyone else's fight, and you won't settle, and you won't try to settle for anyone else's fight, and you won't try to interfere in anyone else's fight. And so So the table could celebrate, for example, when environmental groups were able to pressure U.S. Bank into divesting from fossil fuels, but continue to press on other issues that we were looking at the bank to address. So I think the skills that we bring as trade unionists in to create a public crisis, to bring, we always start in organizing campaigns with trying to bring people to the table who do not want to negotiate with us because they don't want there to be a union in their workplace. We are experts in creating the crisis that requires people who are more powerful than we are to sit down with us. And that is something that I think community groups have in Minnesota have learned a lot from, and it's been of mutual benefit. So that's how I would think of when we think about our commitments moving forward, is that it's not just about when we make our list of bargaining demands. And I love just as what she says about the Boston teachers, about surveying not just their members but communities. Like that was something we did a lot as well. But after and before the moment of negotiations, there are things that we can learn from community and things that community can learn from us.
Thank you so much for that. And Larry, how about you? Again, it's really easy to inherit this, this traditional example of unions being the solitary leader who gets everything done. And bargaining for the common good means that it is all hands on deck. You get members involved in these campaigns because everybody wins. And how did you get members involved so that it was a real team effort? You have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. As you heard from Chris Shelton at the beginning today, lots of CWA examples of this, whether it's nurses in Buffalo or communication workers at many different companies fighting for broadband for all. But again, I think for us in CWA, it goes back to the notion that we can't act as if we're just bargaining for ourselves, or we're not going to succeed, whether it's bargaining at the bargaining table or bargaining in a political sense. We're not going to succeed unless, in fact, in reality, our goals are rooted in the goals of the community or even of the nation. And so I'm going to give just, well, first of all, one counter example. We heard from Joe McCartan at the beginning. Check out his book on the air traffic controllers strike of 1981. And, myself and my union, literally worked to support those air traffic controllers day after day at the airports. But they didn't do what we're talking about here. And Ronald Reagan deliberately smashed them, and the book accounts for that. But that fight was the exact counter example. Oh, we're air traffic controllers. We can shut down the system. We don't need to build alliances. A strike will work for us. So the counter example would be CWA and bargaining on healthcare. So like every union, literally we're now in 40 years, it's every union, but I'm going to give a CWA example of trying to hold on like we're on the side of a cliff to the healthcare that got bargained generations ago, when unions were bargaining for 30 or 40% of the population, 35%, not for 10%. And so the best and biggest example of this kind of different way to look at it would be the strike at NYNEX, New York New England Telephone Company, today Verizon, 1989, 60,000 workers on strike for over 100 days. This is not a one-day strike or 1 week or a 1 month. It was vicious. And by that time, I was the national organizing director, heavily involved in what we called mobilization. To your point, every member's got to be involved if we're going to bargain on bigger issues. If we want to just cave in, like on our healthcare, and go along, you don't need that. But if we're going to make a fight against one of the largest 10 corporations in America around healthcare, we're going to need member involvement and then the members reaching out. So we had a very simple slogan, which still works today. It's painful that all of labor, doesn't embrace this, even in my own union. But it was no healthcare cuts at NYNEX, healthcare for all. Healthcare for all, not healthcare cuts at NYNEX. And we have carried that same fight for literally since 1989 into almost every bargaining session around healthcare. It makes a difference. You mobilize the community, but the union has to make it clear that the union itself is fighting for something that can easily be comprehended around healthcare for all, like Medicare for all. Not that the union is essentially saying to the community, well, we're fighting for our healthcare, and then you fight for yours. And so I think that one of the elements of this has to be what Mark talked about so well at the front end, reciprocity, that we actually are there. Again, that was a bedrock of Jobs with Justice since 1987. We have to be willing to commit ourselves in every way imaginable. And in my breakout group, we had a veteran of the Newark teachers strike who went to jail for 15 days fighting for the union way back, probably in the 1980s. And he exuded bargaining for the public good when he spoke in our breakout group. And he went to jail for his union for 15 days, not 15 minutes. And so I think when we think about examples like healthcare, central to the bargaining of all of us, we've also got to make healthcare for all central to the political work that we do, and not just assume, well, someday that'll be taken care of, but meanwhile, we'll have our healthcare.
I appreciate that closing example because I also think it encapsulates what all of you have shared, and all of you shared examples of how your unions pushed boundaries. You pushed boundaries on what a traditional labor union is, how a traditional labor union is supposed to behave. I got that a lot when people would ask the St. Paul Federation of Teachers to behave differently, and then we would behave differently, and they'd say, "Why aren't you acting like a union?" Pushing boundaries, it was central, again, to borrow Fed's point, that through line in all of your work. Hearing that Fed, you took your members out of their silos. You took them to houses of worship. You invited them to walk along to barbershops, to have conversations where the community is found and most comfortable, as opposed to saying, come to our place of power, right? Come to our union hall or come to where we meet. You went to have conversations with the community. Jessica, again, the idea of serving the community for negotiations priorities, that is pushing the boundaries of whose voice matters in our contracts. Javier, talking about making these fights such public fights that there's no fight that is too big. Going after, asking US Bank to behave like a member of the community is a really reasonable concern when you build community members all together looking at US Bank to be that member of the community. And Larry, that example of healthcare for all ends up being that example that can bring more people to be supportive of those common goals. I remember when I was still a rank and file teacher and a group of secretaries was on strike at the University of Minnesota, and there was a letter to the editor with someone very upset that these secretaries thought they could go on strike because, and the letter writer went on to say, I don't know what they want. I make $30,000 a year and I don't have health care either. And I thought, no, that is the wrong frame. That, I want to live in a world where someone sees those secretaries on strike saying that they want a living wage and healthcare and says, yeah, actually, I want a living wage and healthcare at my job as well. And all of you have talked about ways that you really build power together to have the community say the pie is big enough for all of us. And in so many of those examples that you shared. I'd like to ask a little bit about your advice for next steps. Some of you had the chance to hear some of our participants commit to their next steps. Obviously, some of you, like all of us, have had the chance to hear some of the steps you have taken, those first steps you took, some of the bigger and bolder boundary pushing steps you took. We have participants who are just starting out in this work, like we all once were. and we have participants who have been working alongside all of us for a while. What is your advice for that next step? What do you see as opportunities in front of us right now that you want to make sure you share with everybody today? Javier, why don't I start with you on this one? And then Larry, I'll go to you, and then Jessica, and then Fed.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll answer that by telling a little story. Back in 2007, I was still a very new leader of Local 26, and Isaiah, faith-based organization here in Minnesota, they approached SEIU about building a relationship with us, and in my mind, they were trained in a Gamaliel model of one-to-ones and very methodical, and to me, I would just think, my gosh, this is so many meetings, right? It's like there's a pre-meeting and a meeting and a post-meeting for everything, and there were and I experienced these one-to-ones, and I was just sort of like amused by them. And then there was a moment when, as I mentioned before, we're a union of immigrants, and this was the tail end of the George W. Bush years, and there were dramatic workplace raids and neighborhood raids happening in Minnesota, and we got word that that ICE was in a neighborhood, a suburb of Minneapolis called Richfield. And we knew we had a lot of members there, that there had been a report that they were knocking on doors in apartment complexes. I picked up the phone and called a pastor that I had met and through Isaiah, and said, we need a place of sanctuary for folks to go to in this. And it was a 2-minute call, perhaps. He called me back 5 minutes later and said, Church of Ascension is open and ready and willing. And thank God, we did not have to use it that day. But something clicked for me, like, this is why we build a relationship, right? Because there was the trust that all it took. I didn't have to explain. I didn't have to credential. I suppose I didn't have to tell him how important this was. It was just instantaneous. And so the action item I would give you all to do if you are labor leaders is to methodically and thoughtfully build relationships with leaders in your community, such that you get to a point, right, where you can make that kind of a call, and it's just understood and it's quick, because that is, to me, putting bargaining for the common good into practice in our everyday lives.
Thank you so much. Larry, how about you? What opportunities, what next steps do you see out there that you want to make sure people are thinking about?
Sure. I think the starting point is, what are the issues that our members will get involved in? So in CWA, it goes back to what we call CWA mobilization, whether it's before a contract or whether it's just an issue that even within a contract is a big deal, but where we're not going to succeed if we only look at here's who we are and here's who the employer is. And so whether that issue is big, like healthcare for all, or whether it's, say classroom size, big enough issue if it was a teachers union, or what you heard Chris talk about this morning, broadband for all in a particular state. Then you map out, okay, number one is always going to be our own members. So all too often we sort of jump over the members. So number one is the members. Is this an issue that the members care about and that they'll put, say an hour a week into? And I like to be very concrete, not a minute, but, that they'll work on. And then it's to map out, we used to call it a power analysis, but on that particular issue, if we start out with a unified membership who will work on this, number one, demonstrate their unity on the job. There's a lot of ways we did that and do that in CWA. Starts with simple things like wear red on Thursday, no matter whether it's a journalist at the New York Times or a technician at AT&T. But that unity then goes to that issue. What is that issue going to be? And then to figure out, okay, outside of the workplace, if we're unified here, who are our allies? And then we map that out. So you start with the labor council. And where you have a strong labor council, we don't have that everywhere. That's a natural place to go to bring up this issue. This is what we're doing. It's not just solidarity. This is for the common good. And then, is there a Jobs with Justice group? What are the other coalitions that are around? Could be immigrant group. Or like Jessica, start a new group. That's a lot more work. But, and so, we actually map out a campaign around this issue. And that campaign, in every case, will start with our members, their unity, their commitment of time, and their commitment of the connections that they have. And we've heard about lots of different types of connections, but that when we put all of that together, we have a campaign plan that if we succeed in doing the campaign according to that plan, we have at least a 50% chance of succeeding on the issue. It can't be tilting at windmills, or else we're going to teach our members that we do hopeless work. So we have to, and then lastly, I just want to say one more time, the thing that's least obvious to our members in CWA or anybody I've ever talked to is reciprocity, what Mark talked about. And again, that's why in Jobs with Justice, that pledge card was central. I'll be there 5 times a year, not 50, 5 times a year for somebody else's fight as well as my own. We've got to teach that to our members. There's nothing about any of us that matters that much if we're not willing to be there for somebody else's fight and not just our own.
Thank you so much, Larry. Jessica, how about you? What do you want to make sure is on people's radar screens about opportunities and next steps that you want to make sure they are thinking about or they know exist?
Sure. So one definitely is just start with your natural allies. I was remiss, Larry, in not mentioning that one of our very first partners was actually Jobs of Justice in Boston, and they were the founding members with us of the Boston Education Justice Alliance and Mass Education Justice Alliance. They continue to be one of our closest partners, and they were the ones who were there from the start and helping us to create this coalition of a student-led, parent-led, family-led educational justice coalition. And so certainly take that to heart. There are folks who are there and already want to help and have the expertise too of organizing, and which leads me to my second point, I guess, which is asking for help. Not all of us naturally know how to organize, and it does take skill, it does take training, it does take support and help. And we were able to call on our friends from JWJ who had really incredible organizers to help us think through, how do we do a community charrette process in first place, and who should we invite, and how do we map the community? And so you don't have to do this alone. You should definitely engage not just your members, but the folks who can help you. And you might have folks who are in your membership who are actually former organizers and want to be a part of this work. And so I think my last piece of advice would be definitely to ensure that you're doing the work within your union too, to help educate around what is bargaining for the common good. It can sound very intimidating at first. Your negotiating teams might push back and say, I don't know if we want to try something new. But if you're able to give specific examples and say, actually, we've really been doing it already. There's a spectrum, right? And you bite off little by little, and you get experience, and you keep going. And the one thing I forgot to mention before too is I think it does go hand in hand with open bargaining. And again, that doesn't mean that in the next contract you have a completely open bargain where it's completely open to the community. Maybe you start with silent reps. That's what we're doing this time. So we're starting with some silent reps. Maybe you start just with one forum where you open it to community. And like I said, on my small group, we had interpretation for 7 languages. Maybe you just start with 1 or 2 and just have one forum. But there are many different ways to enter into this work. And it is about the common good. It's about how are we working together? What are our common interests? And finding the people who have those common interests is always a great place to start.
I really appreciate that. That's wonderful, Jessica. Fed, how about you? What are those next steps or opportunities you want to make sure you get on people's radar screens today? You want them to be thinking about after today?
Yeah, so I think you all have hit on a lot of points, but I'll say this, and this is the advice I give to a lot of people who want to build out alliances and relationships. Don't go to the community when you need something. Go to the community before they need anything. Don't go to the community when you need something. Go to the community before they need anything. Build those relationships. Go to their meetings. Find out what their interests are. Immerse yourself in what they are doing. NAACP, Jobs for Justice, Urban League, LULAC. The list goes on and on and on. What is the local preacher doing in your area? He might be having a book bag giveaway. You might want to just sponsor some volunteers or whatever it is. But you've got to immerse yourself in the business of the community first before you go out and ask somebody to stand with you. One of the most powerful things that ever happened to me was my superintendent went out and said, we're not giving raises to anybody. I got a million calls from pastors, from parents, from friends, from people at the local markets. They wanted to know how they could help. And at my bargaining, our first session way back in 2015, it seems like a million years ago, it was only 7 years ago, we had a bargaining team of 100 people, but only 25 were my members. 75 were community members who asked to stand with us. They asked to stand with us. They didn't do it because of me. They did it because they were friends with a leader, a building rep, or they understood that this teacher was a volunteer at the local Boys and Girls Club and that they were not being treated fairly, or that a teacher had taught 2 generations of their family and they knew that this superintendent was wrong. And so you have to create those relationships, find out what they are, and then cultivate those relationships. And it takes time, and it takes diligence, and it takes consistency to do that. This is not a one-hit wonder. Bargaining for the common good is not just something you're just gonna pop up on the wall and magic is gonna happen. This is about, sweat equity. This is about work, mapping. You heard from Larry, Javier talked about relationships, and Jessica just, put it all together. But I think consistency, make sure you show up to fights. Solidarity means everything in the union movement. Solidarity, not only with our brothers and sisters who are in the labor force, but in the workforce, in those community folks. You have to show solidarity so that somebody will show that reciprocity back to you. So that's and the last thing is, we're living in a world where you don't have to worry about what the issue is. There's going to be an issue tomorrow because there's an issue today. Things are changing faster and more rapidly than we've ever seen it. But every crisis is an opportunity, every single crisis. So don't hang your head. Don't shrug your shoulders. Don't say, oh, woe is me, because people have been fighting this fight for a long time and it's a fight worth having. But find out what the opportunity is in the crisis. And the last thing for me is have fun with what you're doing. Find some fun in this work because it will drive you insane because you want it right. You want to make, and you're on the right side of history, but you've got to know that you're plugging away, doing your part and bringing everybody along with you. So I'll end there and just say that because my friends here on the panel are really smart folks and they really have done some great work.
That's so wonderful, Fed. I have to say, I heard a sincerity from all of you that goes right back to some of those very first comments all of you made. And that is that this sincerity of bringing trust to this work. Larry, your point about don't jump over members, and you were elected by members, that is your work. But then Jessica, for you to kind of to also add to that, that you go to your natural allies first. These are likely the sort of people who are also living alongside your members, worshiping alongside your members, grocery shopping alongside your members, right? This is that common cause. Javier talked about being able to make that call because the trust, the relationship was already built out and fed, to immerse yourself in others' needs. That just encapsulates this common theme and this sincerity that all of you bring to this, that you knew this was the direction to go. Your gut was telling you, your heart was telling you, your head was telling you. And so it was a matter of just making sure that you told your feet to go this direction. It's absolutely incredible. I think we have time for one sort of lightning round. And today is a day where we have now have a positive unionization vote in at least one Amazon location. And so today we get to close out looking to welcome a lot more workers to the union movement. And so I'd like, if you will go around very quickly to predict the future of common good work. What is a top issue? What is a top tactic? Who is a partner? Or what are some of those wins that you want to predict we have coming up? Fed, let's have you do your prediction first, and then Jessica, Larry, and Javier.
Okay, so I'll start. I am in DC most of my time these days, but I'm from Florida. And so in Florida, I predict that we will win all of the culture wars that our governor are trying to enact against common folk. We have a bill that is anti-gay or anti-LGBTQ. We have a bill that's anti-CRT. We have a bill that says it's anti-woke. We have a bill that is for everything about these culture wars. But I do predict that we will win these fights over time, because people always win. I believe we're on the right side of history. I believe that a small, committed group of people can never be underestimated. And that's what the union movement has always been. That's what civil rights has always been. That's what the women's rights were always about. That's why our brothers and sisters in AAPI are banding together with a network of folks who are against this, this Asian hate, which is the craziest thing ever, because this is our country, all of our country, and culture wars will not win against any of us. And so I think that we're going to be on the right side. We just have to kind of keep plugging along. Everybody does their part. Find your niche, do what you can, when you can, while you can. And we will change this country ever so slightly towards making it a better future for people like little Doug, who we've seen in the window every so often with Jessica. We will turn this country into what it's supposed to be, for the people, by the people, of the people. And I hate to be so Pollyannish about that, but I come from a people who have been oppressed for a really long time, And it will be very easy to not love a country who has not loved us back in many ways. But we are optimistic. I am of a persevering people. I am in the labor movement. I care about others. And I want to leave this place a better place for my own kids, because they need to have a better way of life than I had. And so I'm trying to do my part. And by helping my own kids, I help your kids and your grandkids and your nieces and your nephews, because that's what it's about. So I am ever optimistic, and I'm a teacher. That's what we do. Every school year, we get a bunch of kids who we know we've got to take from one square to the next. And so that takes eternal optimism to actually create the magic in a classroom. And that's what we do. So I'll leave it there. And thank you so much, Mary Catherine. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Fed. Jessica, what is your prediction for the future of common good work?
Sure. So I'll start local and then I'll go take a bigger kind of lens. So locally, We are starting with the support of the AFT and Randy Weingarten to really be pushing for a Green New Deal for Green New Schools. And this is not just about better facilities and HVAC, which obviously we need and pandemic underscored, but it's also thinking about sustainable energy for our communities. It's about thinking about climate resiliency centers and having our schools be those places when, if there is a climate issue, you can go to get refrigeration for your medications or water, or if it's too cold, you go there for warmth, or too hot, you go there to cool down. And so that, I think, is one big common good campaign that we're really excited about pursuing. And then I think in terms of the larger common good movement, I believe in the labor movement, and I believe that the labor movement is going to become synonymous with fighting for social, racial, and economic justice, fighting for workers and for equity. And when people think about unions, they know that they're not just fighting for their own unions or their own members, quote unquote, but for everyone, for healthcare for all, for housing stability, for climate justice, for education justice, and so much more, because that's what everyone deserves.
Fantastic. Larry, your prediction for the future of common good work, what is it?
Solidarity. How did workers win today at Amazon in Staten Island with a union that they created themselves against a $2 trillion corporation? Solidarity. And Fed mentioned this earlier, but solidarity among working class people, Black, brown, and white, is at a high point for at least the last 70 years in this country. We've got to all get up on that wave and ride it and build it. And my prediction is that we've only seen the beginning of this. The Amazon workers used mostly spontaneity. They didn't use the resources that all of us on this panel and most of us who spoke today have. The resources of large organizations with tens of millions of dollars. They did it themselves. That needs to be a spark for all of us. A spark that we feel today, as Fed said, fun, jump up and down, feel that solidarity, and then build it.
Fantastic. Javier, what do you think? What is your prediction for the future of common good work?
So I'll point back to something I'd mentioned briefly before, and that's the issue of police and community relations and in this country, and the racial justice emergency that we've been in for a very long time. And I think since 2020, since the global reckoning is what we called it then about racial justice, the backlash has been much more effective policy-wise than that uprising was, right? We have books being banned across the country. We have the boogeyman of critical race theory. And we have made zero progress in terms of actually reforming the way our communities are policed. So my prediction is that it will be through a common good lens that communities come together to actually address the issue of policing and racial justice, which is one bit of the puzzle, but a very big one. And that's both my prediction and my hope, because I do think that is just going to be key to whether we make progress and fight back against this very effective backlash.
Thank you so much for those predictions. And Javier, thank you very much for that hope. I think I heard all of you express a similar hope in speaking them out loud today. Let's roll up our sleeves together and make those predictions happen. I would like to thank our panelists this afternoon, Javier, Larry, Fed, Jessica. Your work continues to inspire me and motivate me to be a partner to all of you and a partner to everyone who is working for stronger public schools, stronger labor movement, a stronger democracy, and everyone who is amplifying the sort of vigorous, healthy, open debate and dialogue we need to get there, and common good work that's happening at our bargaining tables and beyond. The Albert Shanker Institute would like to thank all of you and commit our support to those next steps you committed to today. We'd like to invite all of you back to a session this September where you can report out on how your next step went, and we'll have a cadre of experienced union leaders again gathered there to workshop bigger and bolder ideas with you. In the meantime, thank you for joining us here today. I cannot wait to see the common good work growing across the country. Take care of yourself as you take care of each other. Goodbye, everybody.